My name is Lee Kolb. I teach English at ECC and I organize our film and lecture series. And it will be my honor tonight to introduce our guest presenter and discussion leader, Shanee Haynes. I wanted to open the evening with a quote that I'd recently heard. It's from the Pulitzer Prize winning author, Isabel Wilkerson, who's the author of The Warmth of Other Suns. And she has a new book out titled Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents. And as we've all watched the film, as we're coming into this presentation and discussion this evening, we know that it's very difficult to watch. And so many of these conversations and images that we need to see are hard to look at sometimes. This is what Wilkerson says. America is an old house. We can never declare the work over. Wind, flood, drought, and human upheavals batter a structure that is already fighting whatever flaws were left unattended in the original foundation. When you live in an old house, you may not want to go into the basement after a storm to see what the rains have wrought. Choose not to look, however, at your own peril. The owner of an old house knows that whatever you are ignoring will not go away. Whatever is lurking will fester whether you choose to look or not. Ignorance is no protection from the consequences of inaction. Whatever you are wishing away will gnaw at you until you gather the courage to face what you would rather not see. So to help us see and look tonight, I would like to introduce you to Shanee Haynes. She is an assistant professor of communications at East Central College, and she's taught here since 2009. She received her bachelor's degree from the University of Missouri St. Louis in mass communications, followed by her master's degree in communications from Lindenwood University in 2007. She teaches mass media communications here, as well as public speaking and oral communications. Welcome, Shanee, and thank you so much for leading us tonight.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. What a wonderful introduction from my amazing colleague and friend, Ms. Cole. A privilege, truly, to work with. So again, thank you for being here this evening. My name, again, Shanee Haynes. And yes, I've been working at East Central College since 2009. So when I was asked to be a guest speaker for this film, I was really thrilled to do it. And I first saw the film that you all hopefully have already watched, but even if you haven't, you know, you will watch. I guess I first watched it about 1.5 years or so ago with my husband. And we absolutely thought this film was absolutely phenomenal. And I remember thinking at the time, should we watch it with our then 7-year-old son, AJ? But we decided, that, not yet, not quite yet. But when I watch films like 13th, I really can't help but to think of, people like my husband, my brothers, and of course, my young son, AJ. And I think about, how am I supposed to prepare him for the world that we live in? I'm going to share my screen with you here. So when, let's see. Did I do that right? Can you see the screen? Awesome. Okay. So I remember when my son AJ was about 3 years old, I asked him what color he was. And he would say, I white, mommy, I white. And so I was like, okay. I said, well, what color is mommy? And he said, brown. And I said, okay, well, what color is daddy? And he said, brown. I said, okay, well, what color are you again? White, I'm white. So, we didn't really think much of it. I mean, as you can see, he's a little bit, he's lighter skinned. So, we didn't say anything about it. Well, a few years later, we asked him, I guess he might have been around 8 years old. I asked him the same question. I said, AJ, what color are you? And I can honestly say that I was not prepared for his answer. He said, I'm a smart, talented, kind, and funny brown boy. And I really could not have been more proud of him in that moment. Because you see, AJ was telling me that there's so much more to him than the color of his skin. And his answer actually reminded me of a famous quote. It goes, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So pop quiz, who said that famous quote? If I say the first person to put it in the chat wins $1 million.
MLK.
You got it. Yes, and I have something for you. Let me share my screen again here. Because I anticipated somebody was going to get it right. So, hey, all right. Now, unfortunately, we don't live in that nation. We don't live in that nation yet. And so my husband and I have to teach our little black son that he does live in a world where he will, in fact, be judged by the color of his skin, and that, unfortunately, the content of his character has to take a back seat. So we teach our son not, right? We teach him not to judge others by the color of their skin. But wait a minute, but you will be, son. You will be judged by the color of your skin. We teach him that it doesn't matter what color you are, that we are all equal. Oh, but wait, not you exactly. Teaching him that this system is not designed for him to succeed, and that even when he's doing nothing wrong, he's guilty. And when he asks, but why, mom and dad? Why are things like that? Why? We'll watch this film. And we'll watch it because I feel like it explains so much of the why things are the way they are today. So I want to tell you about the director of the film and what the film is about, and also some key takeaways. So filmmaker Ava DuVernay is a writer, a producer, and a director, and that's just to name a few of her many titles that she has. She's the oldest of 5 siblings raised by her mother and stepfather near Compton, California. And in college, her favorite job was as an actress. She told People magazine it was because Little Richard would come into the restaurant every Sunday and would tip her $100. So, not bad. She majored in African studies, and her background in education were in journalism and public relations. And actually, at the age of 27, she started her own public relations company. Now, something that might surprise you is that she didn't even pick up a camera until she was 32 years old, that she didn't even go to film school. And she's now 48 years old. She is the first woman of color to direct a live action film with a budget of over $100 million in the big screen fantasy, A Wrinkle in Time in 2018. You might remember this was the film starring Oprah Winfrey, Mindy Kaling and Reese Witherspoon. 13th was Academy Award nominated for social justice documentary. Ava DuVernay is also the first Black woman to direct a film nominated for a Best Picture Oscar in 2014 for her film Selma, a movie about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s civil rights march on Selma. She has created, co-written, directed the film When They See Us, a film where she retold the 30-year-old story of the 5 African-American teenagers falsely convicted of rape in 1989, shifting that narrative from the Central Park 5 to the exonerated 5. It had 11 nominations at the 71st Primetime Emmy Awards. Now, in addition to making tantalizing, she makes tantalizing television dramas like Queen Sugar. She also does museum installation, music videos. I mean, the list truly just goes on and on. She also owns Forward Movement, a film and television production company. She founded her own company, Array, to distribute films made by and focusing on Black people. She has countless awards and recognitions. The African American Film Critics Best Screenplay for I Will Follow, Sundance Film Festival Directing Award for Middle of Nowhere, African American Film Critics Association Best Director for Selma. I have on here Primetime Emmy Award Outstanding Documentary for 13. So now that you know a little bit more about the director of the film, I thought I would share this really amazing quote I found while I was researching. And it says, the United States did not just criminalize a select group of Black people, it criminalized Black people as a whole, a process that, in addition to destroying untold lives, effectively transferred the guilt from slavery from the people who perpetuated it to the very people who suffered through it. I thought that was an amazing quote. Now, a little bit about the 13th Amendment. It was ratified in 1865, and this is what it states: that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to its jurisdiction. So you see that laws change, right? Laws change sometimes. But I want you to think to yourself, do people's perceptions change just because a law does? Now, I'll let you let the film do what I think it does excellently and explain how the 13th Amendment links slavery to the mass incarceration of Black people. And along the way, the film takes us on an exploration of events and examples that, I mean, it really paves a very devastating past. So think of all the information as a map. DuVernay maps this perpetuity for her audience. So consider the overwhelming representations of disempowerment of African Americans. And you should really let your mind be blown by what you're going to hear in this film. Tracing its history can give us so much valuable context to the current state of things. Now, DuVernay wants us to see things in this sense. She says, you can see the color red by itself, right? You see the color red. But when you put it next to other colors, it creates a different picture. And that's really how we need to look at this. We need to look at it as a continuum. Complexities of the system trace back over 300 years. So after watching this, we often ask ourselves, you know, well, what can we do? We ask ourselves, so I want to ask you, well, what's in your power to do? So I challenge you to read more about these topics, to watch more films like this one and learn. So learn more and educate yourself. Just don't turn a blind eye. I want you to consider humanity. Consider humanity first, before skin color, before gender, before sexual orientation, before religion, before disability. Because we're all humans, right, before we're anything else. And when you treat people with humanity, none of the other stuff really even matters. I want you to spread the information. Let me rephrase, spread the right information. And doing that can really change the narrative. So talk about the ugly truth, tell your family and friends to watch this film and films like it, share your thoughts on social media, Facebook, there's Twitter. My students were telling me about something called Snapchat and TikTok. I'm not really schooled on those yet, but wherever you want to put it out there. Because I really hope this film upsets you. I hope after you watch it, you get mad. Just don't be silent. Because it feels uncomfortable to talk about these issues, but you know what? Be uncomfortable. Because silence serves no one. And actually the system counts on our silence. DuVernay said in a 2016 interview with The Atlantic, quote, "After you see 13th, silence in this case is consent." So when you hear a racist joke, say that's not okay, that's not funny. When you hear people say, oh, those Black people did this to themselves, you correct them and you say, you know what, you need to go watch 13. We have to change. And I don't mean like, you know, molding. I mean, we have to stop this system and a new one must be designed. So take this Play-Doh, for instance, right? It's nice and new. Real pretty. Anyone would want to play with it, right? Come on. It's not going to be so stuck in here. I'll hit it from the bottom. Okay. There we go. All right. It's nice and new. It's pretty. Oh, I can smell the privilege. It smells good. Very good. So it's real pretty, you know. Anyone would want to play with this, right? But what if I rub it on the bottom of my shoe? What if I take this hammer, and yes, I have presentational aids. What if I take this hammer, really dig into that. Rub it on the floor. What if I spit on this? But wait, I guess I shouldn't have done that. I guess that was wrong. So let me fix it. Let me fix it. There we go. You want it now, right? You want to play with this? Right? No? Well, you see, some people don't have a choice but to play with this because this is what they're born into. They don't get to come out as a They're born into a society that has decided that they're dirty and unworthy. Now, I'm just here speaking about Black injustices when there's so many more that exist in this country for all sorts of minorities. So we have to stop redesigning. We have to stop reforming and redevising and rebuilding and redoing. I'm so sick of reing everything. You know, the prefix re means again and again. So all we're doing is repeating. And it's ridiculous. And I know ridiculous doesn't start with RE, but that's okay. But I'm sick of reading everything. We read this and read that. We read this and read that. So instead, I want some INs. I want some Ns. We need to invent something with the intent, the insight, and intelligence to initiate an infrastructure that is insistent on the inclusion of individuals equally and ingrain it in our world. Now that's inspiration. We have to stop and things have to change. But it didn't change in their lifetime. Will the change come in our lifetime? Will it come in AJ's lifetime? I want you to leave here with a new experience. I want you to leave here with a new appreciation for the Black experience and
be the change you wish to see in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shanee. So now if anyone has, and you can type in the chat and I will relay your comments or questions. Stephanie noted that in the list of ins is that it's also a good investment to make these changes. Or if you just want to unmute and make a comment or ask a question about the presentation, about the film, it's an open forum.
I'll go first. Thank you, Ms. Haynes, for your presentation. I'm also an educator, so I've got to figure out how to use more educational props in my own classroom. So I kind of know the history of East Central College, and it's similar to where I teach in Tennessee. So my question is about visibility, particularly when you're in a space where some of our students have never had a Black educator before. And it's unfortunate that many students across the country could graduate from a 4-year or 2-year program and never have a Black educator at that particular level. So how important is it for you to have a sense of visibility on your campus and in your community?
Oh, wow. It's extremely important. And I'm fortunate that the classes, some of the classes that I teach, it's a core requirement for our college. And so I actually get to see a lot of students. And so, and you're absolutely right. A lot of students, I may be the only Black educator in their entire higher education or their entire education, truly. And so I try not to shy away from topics that may come up in our classes and not be afraid to, address those. And so I think it's very important that that students actually have these discussions. Absolutely, these discussions are very important. And so I want to be as visible as I can in my community and in my school. Thank you.
I'll go next. Full disclosure, I'm one of the brothers, so great presentation. And I'm also an actor and a filmmaker and a producer. My question for you, one of my questions for you would be, what role do you think, not just social media, because I do have my own problems with lots of what social media does, but what role do you think media plays in this larger conversation, this idea of perception? And so many people consume their news, so many people get their information from the media. How much of an impact, a direct impact do you think movies like this and others help to shape that people's perception in the media?
Well, thank you for your full disclosure. And oh man, we could be here for hours and hours to get really deep into that. The media shapes so much of the good and the bad, and our perceptions of everything, truly everything. But films like this one are even more important, and we really don't even have enough, in my opinion. And so we have to surround ourselves with this information, with the right information, especially in this day and age where that fake news is so easy to get our hands on. It's everywhere. So that's one of the things I love about teaching mass media communications, is I get to be kind of in that seat where I can teach, other people, this is how you filter that, and give them the tools and the skills to be able to make those decisions between what's, fake news and what they should and shouldn't share on social media, but also giving them that media literacy that they need to be able to push the conversation forward and be more critical thinkers. But the role the media plays in all of this it's profound. It's very, very profound. Lee, would you like to elaborate on that, being a media and journalism educator?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that in spaces like ours that are so very white, in terms of the county that ECC is in, is, as of the last census, 97% white, and that's pretty reflective in our student population. So where do they get their messages about Black Americans and racism and these things that are increasingly, they're exposed to ideas and messages about this via social media channels and platforms, but they're often very incorrect. And I think also the power of media in, there was some research a few years ago, it's one of my favorite articles that I push to media students, that complex media representation of people unlike yourself can literally change your brain. So parasocial relationships, all of this like deep dive psychological stuff that if you don't live in a racially diverse area, media has the power to also, we know how it negatively shapes, but good complex representation, when people feel like they've seen a three-dimensional complex representation, that can change them and change their brain. And that we see that in literature as well, being exposed to literature that builds empathy. So the power of literature and media to open minds and build empathy is just really incredible. But something that frightens me increasingly is that educators are going to become more and more afraid of trying to infuse that media and literature into the classroom because of the national rhetoric. So. Other thoughts or observations about that topic? Experiences?
I have a follow-up for both of you, if you don't mind. One of the most concerning things for me with the current state of affairs in the United States is this conception that this can be the truth over here and this can be the truth over here, and both can exist in the same space. And that idea seems to have been further perpetuated over these last however many years you want to say. So in a lot of ways, it feels like we are getting further and further away from agreeing on what a single truth is. Do either of you know of any statistics that exist, studies that exist that say that address how long it takes to undo, a lie that has been perpetuated in this country?
Lead, would you like to share like that?
Hundreds of years, I don't know. As soon as you started that question, I'm thinking about, because I'm attempting to use the 1619 project in a couple of my classes. I predominantly teach in the English classroom and then also in some media rooms. And I had a student say, well, I don't agree with this. I don't believe in this. And it's just very hard to know how to grapple with that. And you can talk about perspective and whose stories do we hear, and how does that shift and how does that make that wrong? But it is really overwhelming when that is the answer of just, I don't accept that truth because it's not like mine. I don't know. So in that theme, especially thinking about the 1619 project, I'm thinking 400 years, I don't know. We're still trying to unlearn these lies, and I don't know, or single perspectives, and I just don't know. It's hard to know and see how that's going to change.
I absolutely agree. I think it also starts with leadership. If you've got, the wrong leadership, then it's probably impossible for people's perceptions to change when you hear, there are good people on both sides. And so yeah, I'm going to say it starts at the top, and it starts everywhere. I know I just said it starts at the top, but it's really collective. It's everybody, and people's perceptions, they're very difficult to change. One film isn't going to do it, or one book isn't going to do it. You really have to be committed and want to learn and want to be open-minded. So yeah, I wish it was sometime soon, but with the current state of things, yeah, I'm sure it won't be in my lifetime.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
All right, okay. Full disclosure, I'm actually a conservative Christian, and I live on a street that is predominantly Black. I would say 75% Black. I've been able to make a lot of really good relationships with kids on my street. They're coming over every single day to see what's going on and to help have me fix their bikes and that kind of stuff, play football, whatever, basketball, which is cool because I love doing that stuff as a kid. And I'm really trying to understand more of this and more of my story as I grew up on a pig farm. So I'm just giving you a little groundwork for where I'm coming from. And now I live in the city, a small city, a very small city. But anyways, what I'm interested in is your perspective, your best evidence for systemic racism in America. I did watch the documentary 2 nights ago, and then last night I took notes, and it was good for me to learn a lot of that stuff, a lot of the stuff I didn't know. But as you said, systemic discrimination is on a continuum, and it seems as though we have made progress. I would venture to guess that most of you think we have made progress on this continuum to a certain extent. And so I definitely see a difference between 240 years ago and now. What is your best evidence for systemic discrimination or systemic racism in America today? That's something I'd be interested in discussing with you all. So.
Best example?
Mm-hmm.
For me, I believe that a really good example comes straight from this documentary, which is the mass incarceration of Black people. And I believe, like, you know, I had described being on a continuum. I think that over time, things have just transferred into other ways to discriminate and keep racism alive. And to me, the mass incarceration of African American people is the example of that. And one of the things that the documentary had brought out, I forget which politician, but someone can let me know if you remember from the documentary that he described how the war on drugs was to keep Black people down, and that it was a hoax, that it was kind of a ploy for that. Lee, did you want to add to that?
Just to kind of segue from what you just said, that what we know also about the sentencing discrepancies between like crack and cocaine that really just ended in the last decade. And so of course, when we look at the incarceration rates now, this didn't happen that long ago. This was just a couple of decades that many of these laws were put into place that we're still reverberating from. So I think that when you break down kind of some of those statistics about the sentencing discrepancies between a different form of the same drug, when you delve into the war on drugs is a really, really good example. I think that is kind of one of those moments that you can very objectively look at those differences.
I guess if I'd like to follow up, if that's okay. I think we can see a disparity. I don't think that means there's been discrimination that's gone on. You'd have to know the motivation of the lawmakers in passing those laws. And the one guy in the documentary, his name was Charles Rangel. Rangel. He was a Black guy. And I did a little research on him, and it was pretty interesting. He actually worked with Reagan, and he pushed Reagan to actually make harsher convictions and that sort of thing. I don't think he was being discriminatory against other Black people. I think he just wanted harsher sentencing for different reasons. One of those reasons that he said was he thought that that drugs were going to be legalized if they didn't push for harsher sentencing and that sort of thing. And so we had a Black legislator in the 1970s meeting with Reagan and actually pushing him to create harsher sentencing and pushing for the war on drugs. And under his leadership, and many of the Congressional Black Caucus members, he got them to vote in favor of the most punitive drug war era legislation, expanding the mandatory minimum sentences and funding more prisons and boosting penalties for crack cocaine. And this was a Black guy that did that. So I guess for me, as a conservative, sometimes I feel like it's unfair for us to make an assumption that somebody has a bad motive, you know?
But I think what you just brought up is an example of it is about it being systemic and not just an individual, because just because the lawmaker was a Black man doesn't mean doesn't kind of discount the idea of systemic racism, because it's about power, and it's not about kind of only that Black people can or cannot be part of that kind of systemic organization of things. I also wanted to say too, we have a really small group. So if others if this wants to be a conversation and not just kind of a Q&A for Shanee and me jumping in, if others want to engage, I think we have a good sized group for that. So this is a side note. If others want to
I'd like to jump in. I think, Jay, first of all, thank you for your question. You raise a lot of important issues. And there's kind of a montage that people have said in the Black community that just because they're your kinfolk is not your skinfolk, and vice versa. So to your point, right, whether it's the civil rights movement, prior, even currently, that there have been white people who have supported a lot of civil rights movements and actions for decades, if not centuries. And to your point, right, that we also see Black people who are in different positions of power who, just because you're Black does not mean that you support a particular idea, interest, or agenda, right? So I think you raise a good point of understanding the difference between discrepancy and discrimination. And so you don't have to be of the same racial background or identity in order for people to act against another group. So I'm thinking of discrepancy as like that there's a lack of similarity between different groups. Whereas when I think about discrimination, I'm thinking about a more intentional, deliberate action that you mean to cause the disparity that we see. So to your original question, in terms of thinking about what is a system that we see the most discrimination in, I literally was taking notes to your question. I said voting legislation, healthcare, education, pipeline to prison, the lack of positive representation, management, unfair treatment of Black and brown people, even historically. So whether it's the Tuskegee syphilis study, I'm in public health. So whether it's the Tuskegee syphilis study or the forced sterilization of Latino women, unfortunately, we have had that history in our country where we see these layers of discrimination. And even as an educator, I think we're all educators in some form or fashion, whether formal or informal, we're seeing these things play out on the next generation. So when I think about what Shanee said at the beginning, where do we start to recognize people's humanity? Yes, we have differences, you know, conservative, liberal, Black, white, whatever the how we describe our own identity is not as to suggest that it's simple and easy and complex as one part of our identity. So I like that, Jay, in your initial question, you describe all the different complexities of your identity. And so I think if we are able to do that in a more intentional and conscious way and just have a meaningful conversation about what is going on in our own communities and the fact that there are Black and brown boys in your community who trust you. So you have done something as a human being to elicit and create trust where they see you as Jay, Mr. J, they see you as a friend, a confidant, and as someone that they can trust. And I would suggest that that has come because you have done your own work and developed a relationship with the people in your community. So I think if we can start to do that more, whether it's where we live, who our neighbors are, that we'll start to see some change, but the systemic change is systematic for a reason. And it unfortunately has worked very well in regards to separating individuals and putting a normative claim that some are better than others.
I like to just go back and forth if we can. As a Christian, I believe that we are all made in the image of God, and that therefore we have inalienable rights. And one of the great things about our society that I fear that we may be losing, and I would like to get your all opinion on this, is the idea that we are innocent until proven guilty. And for me, as a conservative, I think it's unfair to say, well, because we have a disparity, that means people have discriminated. I think in order to claim that somebody has discriminated, you need to actually know their motivation. And until you know somebody's motivation, you should err on the side of caution and say, you know what, this person is innocent until proven guilty. I shouldn't try to attribute some kind of motivation to them that I'm not aware of.
The challenge for me is the intent. And I agree with you that people should get, let's say, the benefit of the doubt, but the intent is very, very dangerous because intent is not good enough from in my opinion. So even though someone may not intend to hurt someone, the byproducts and consequences are still very much there. So I think there's a video that I show in my own classes. It's called, gosh, now it's escaping me. If I remember, I'll look it up and type it in the chat. But it talks about generational poverty. And one of the women in this documentary her name is Tammy. Tammy is one of 22 children. Her parents, again, Tammy's a white female, lives in rural Ohio. And the documentary talks about her life, right? And part of her life is she had, I think, 2 children. And she was so proud of herself to not be on welfare. welfare. And she was saying that she walks 10 miles to work every single day. And this is like 10, 15 years ago. And she worked at Burger King. She had such pride with wearing her Burger King uniform to go to work and walk 10 miles and have a positive attitude every single day. When I show that in my classes, I tell my students right then and there, if I have to walk 10 miles there back and forth in the rain, Shimani is not going to have a positive attitude. I'm just going to be honest. But she cannot control what she was born into, right? She didn't choose her parents. Her parents had 22 children over the course of her lifetime. So she didn't get to choose the poverty. No one chooses poverty, right? She didn't have an opportunity to choose or have a voice in who her family was, what part of the United States she was born into, where she grew up. And therefore that impacts, like Shanee did with the clay, that impacted her ability to have a different type of life. And which that's for me is what I see the difference between the disparity is there, and people don't choose to be impoverished. People don't choose to have these disadvantages that make it much harder for their life outcomes. But when they are born, there are certain circumstances they are built into. So for the Play-Doh example that Shanee used, yes. And so even when she was struggling to get it out, my first thought was, this is really hard. This is a struggle to take the lid off, to do something that we've never really done before. The other part of that is for some people's lives, that Play-Doh is going to go back into that container, the seal's going to be put on it, and somebody's going to present it as, here, this is your life, and that it's new, and it's not. And we have to take into account those historical aspects of all of our lives that make things the way they are, right? So we can't expect people to have the same progression of myself, of Mr. J, of Shanee, of anyone on this call without taking into consideration, Jay, what you said, which is where people come from. So we have to understand where people are coming from and their life trajectory to help us understand where they are now.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for you, Jay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So how do you, when you're, driving down the street, who's predominantly at the bus stop? Who's riding trains and buses? Who is, do you see evidence in your daily life of an imbalance of who is hurting or who is suffering, who is in line for food, do you see that difference? And I guess I'm asking this because your question makes me think that you're going back to the individual and you're looking at them individually, whereas we're talking about system-wide oppression, system-wide. They've done it through intrinsically, like in the movie 13, they've done it through different policies and practices. And I feel like you're talking about individual. Am I correct? And do you see that in your daily life? Is there a majority that are hurting?
Yeah, I mean, I see that. Like I said, 75% of the people on my street are Black. A lot of them are renting. I think most of the kids on my street don't have a dad in the home. And so I would say, yeah, that is a challenge for these kids, definitely. And so what I don't think I get to do, though, is say, just because there's an imbalance doesn't mean that some act of evil has been done against them currently. I think we would all agree that there's been evil done in the past. We've had Southern governments enacting Jim Crow laws unjustly, where justice wasn't blind, where it saw color and it applied laws unjustly to people. That is wrong. And slavery was wrong. And as we've been going along the continuum, we've had the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. We've had the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. We've made progress as a country. And so that's all, I think that's good stuff to me. But there's still a disparity, which is what we're talking about. But what I'm saying is we don't get to say, well, there's been discrimination today because we see a disparity. there are things historically that have happened that we should take into account. But for me, I think the biggest problem is what Barack Obama said. He said, a child raised without a dad is 5 times more likely to be poor, commit crimes, 9 times more likely to drop out of high school, 20 more times to end up in jail, regardless of race. That's regardless of race.
Okay.
And so I think the big problem to me, they're police brutality, mass incarceration, those are all problems. They're problems for everybody, I think, no matter of color. I think the biggest problem to me, and you guys can tell me if you think I'm wrong, is fatherlessness. I think that is the real big problem.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So I'll introduce myself. I'm Stephanie Gutierrez. I identify as, I am a dual citizen. I am enrolled Oglala Lakota. My family's from the Pine Ridge Reservation, and I'm also a US citizen. We are a sovereign nation, so I live in 2 worlds. And I have a native name and I have an English name. The one piece that I would suggest that you consider as to why there are many families in BIPOC communities with one parent is
Did you say BIPOC?
BIPOC, BIPOC, Black Indigenous People of Color. And that is brown-skinned and red-skinned and black-skinned. Predominantly because of what's known as historical trauma. Historical trauma is the after and the, so my background is social work. There is intrinsic trauma that is passed down to us. I believe in every avenue, spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally, it's brought down to us because of the atrocities that our people have been through. So I tell people my mother was born in 1939. She was born in the most horrific years on the reservation. 1890 wasn't a problem, as big a problem as 1939, because by then we were just left to die. And there's lots of policy that was done to improve our lives, to make our lives better. There's policies right now that are in place to improve our lives and make us better, but they've actually caused serious harm. And I think that one of the biggest pieces that we are challenged with, I tell people the greatest harm to our Native children is shame. Shame, a baby's not born with that. That is it's an impression that's made. And it's an impression because shame is taken on by your outside factors. So she was told to never say her language. She went through a boarding school, cut her hair, took her language away, and beat her, and beat the Indian out of her. And that's my mother. So what did she do to me growing up? She raised me with shame. She made me wear my hair in tight curlers every day. So I would go to school looking like a perfect American girl. And I was fortunate. My other half is German and Irish. And we get off the bus and come home every day and our hair was straight. And she would just be like, oh, she did everything she could to knock the Native out of us. And because she didn't want us growing up with the same pressure and pain and abuse that she received. And so, the children in your community, those little boys, I would not doubt. And I would say they suffer too from historical trauma. Every day watching another Black man killed on TV and in the news. And that is so deeper. And that is a root cause of why our families are broken up, why we can't maintain that American dream and that American family. That's just the mental side of things that I believe.
I wanted to add on to thinking about going back to the policy question in terms of the systems that we were built upon and perhaps reformed, going back to that reword, kind of repeated throughout the years that have led us to where we are. One of the things that made the system of slavery in the United States unique is its form of chattel slavery, that in order to allow the system to work, and again, remembering this is just a few generations ago, this isn't 1,000 years ago, this is just a few generations, making sure that slaves could not have family units. Obviously, children were literally sold, but also men and women couldn't get married. That was just a few generations ago. So part of the system that we built is that people in our system of slavery could not get married and have a family structure because that would humanize them, and that you couldn't have slavery if you saw these people as humans. And then, and Shanee brought it up in the chat as well, the Pruitt-Igoe myth is an excellent documentary. And one of the things it touches on is up until the 1960s, and Stephanie, the social workers in the room, you'll have more wisdom about this, but for families, in order to get welfare, there couldn't be a father in the home. So sometimes the government would visit and the father would either hide or have to move out in order for the mother to receive assistance. That's just really 1-2 generations ago. So there were laws and systems in place to break up the nuclear family, or what we consider the nuclear family, and also mass incarceration now, that breaks up families.
But there you've made an assumption, I think, unless you have other evidence I'm not aware of, that did they make these policies to break up the family? Lyndon B. Johnson said he was giving a hand up, not a handout. He was doing it to, in his mind, help. I agree with you. It was terrible, especially for the Black community. They had 24% single motherhood rate, and now it's 71%. But I don't think they intended to do good. The same with Rangel and Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan. I believe they all intended to do well, but they were ignorant and they made some mistakes, So I think it's unfair then to say, well, they had bad intentions. I don't think we know. And therefore I think we should err on the side of caution. That's my point.
So your comment about your statement that they were ignorant and didn't know, that right there is the place with which policies are made. They're white males who have lived in an extremely privileged life, and they never knew what it was like. I mean, they don't know what it's like to have to live through the history and through our lives. They made decisions, and you can say, well, they didn't know, and but their policies are created through a white lens. It's created through what they know. That's why there's so much push to ask people to consider community, ask the community, talk to the community, talk to people of color, hear their stories, hear their families and their histories. It's not understanding another viewpoint. It's not even considering a viewpoint. So I talked to somebody yesterday in St. Louis. We have municipalities. We have 78 municipalities. 78 all have their own courts, their own police, their own fire, everything. And they are all within, a very tight area. Sometimes some are literally 4 blocks wide. That's it. And tickets. So tickets, people getting tickets. More African Americans are given tickets, are paying court fees, are then put into the system. And that money, just in that area, has 46% of all the money that's made on court fees in the state comes from that area. And then when you break that down even more, when you look at the 46%, majority of it is in North St. Louis and North County in the Black communities. There's your data. So you have police officers my husband is a police officer. He understands there's psychological pressure put on them to make tickets. Now, when you have a police officer who has a white lens, who knows nothing else, he only knows his world, and he's been taught through programming that Black people are bad. He is going to profile and look for a Black driver and find a reason to pull him over because he's bad. It's probable. It's called probable cause. He's probably got drugs. He's probably got this. They end up in the system. They get the ticket. So that's a systemic, that is a evidence of a system that is perpetuating aversive discrimination. Aversive discrimination is not overt, it's subliminal.
Can you explain and expound on that? I've never heard that term before. What was the term?
Aversive discrimination.
Aversive.
So overt discrimination is what you're talking about in the past of name calling and burnings and killings and beatings. And now aversive discrimination is what you see with police officers pulling over and going after people of color because of exactly what Shanee was saying, is that Play-Doh is dirty. That Play-Doh is bad. That Play-Doh, they don't have fathers in their home. They probably have guns and all of these other beliefs and myths.
Are they purposely doing, or are you saying it's unconscious bias?
Unconscious bias and purposefully. There are policemen and there
You're saying
are
it's
people.
both.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm conscientious of the time. I did want to alert everyone to look at the chat if you haven't already. There are a few links and recommendations that people have included. Are there any other thoughts or comments, folks?
Well, I just wanted to comment on what Stephanie said. You kept talking about the white lens of politicians. How do you describe Charles Rangel's lens? Did he also have a white lens? Did he have a Black lens, but not a true Black lens? Why did he make those laws and push Ronald Reagan to do the things that he did? How do you describe that?
So in Native communities, in our community, what I can speak to is what's called the crab effect. And that we were raised thinking that it wasn't good to be Native. You're better if you play white and you play in the white world and you learn their ways so that you can survive. And then that's taught down. So my grandfather pushed all of my mothers and his children to get off the reservation, become white, leave these ways behind because you're going to die. Really, it was that. And then my generation comes along and it's to, I have sisters who would deny who they were and tried to be white, live white and act white and speak white and follow those beliefs. And then we were put into the Catholic school system, which I think Shawani mentioned earlier, the education system is, it's orchestrated by white people. Look who's running the Department of Education right now. A very, very wealthy woman, white woman, who's only gone through private schools and is encouraging private schools. There's more I could say. I do have a question.
Yeah, I guess I just don't understand why you would assume that Charles Rangel was trying to be, I guess, more white. it seems to me that from the little bit that I understand from doing a little bit of research about the guy, he saw crack cocaine coming into their communities as bad, and he wanted to try and stamp it down. That was the thinking of a lot of these politicians at the time, is this is going to wreak havoc on our communities. We need to do something about this. They saw it as trying to do something good. Their intentions were good, but the impact of the policy, you can debate on whether it was good or bad, but.
I have too much time. I'm going to let somebody else talk.
Yeah. Are there any other thoughts?
I would just say before people start to go, I just wanted to bring it back to, this has been a great discussion, just to preface that. And I would say that these seemingly smaller, platform discussions, I think have a larger effect in the world. So having conservative, liberal, independent views all intersect in a positive, healthy, respectful way, I think we need more of this.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that that's what this was going to take on today, but I appreciate having these sorts of discussions and these sorts of spaces. And I think more of these things need to happen beyond. But before people start to go, I just wanted to say, for Lee and Shanee, was there some part of the film that you thought that stood out for you the most, that had a big impact on you, that maybe you think people should take away from it?
I'll say first, watch it again. I've seen it 3 times, and I get something new and different ways to see it every single time. So don't watch it just once, watch it 2 times, watch it 3 times. So I'll just leave it at that. It impacts me in different ways each time I watch it. So I would encourage people to watch it again, not just once. Lee?
I agree. I think that anytime in it's beautiful filmmaking, of course, but how we can, in a succinct manner, see all of these historical connections and all of these through threads that make so much of what we talk about and have difficulties with now clearer. So I always appreciate that kind of opportunity to connect history to the present and make all of those connections. So thank you all so much. Again, this was I also wasn't sure how this evening would turn out. So thank you so much for being here and for discussing. Again, we recorded this, and take a glance at the chat if you haven't already. There's so many great recommendations of other things to watch and read. So keep watching and reading and learning. And thank you all again. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night.
Everyone. Good night.
Good night. Would anybody be willing to answer a couple more questions that I have? I don't know if I'm annoying you or not. I don't.